in IT project management and line management. In 2008, she founded her own company, Agile Agenda. And from that point, she started, she's been focusing solely on Agile methods and frameworks. Annette is an extremely experienced Kanban and Scrum consultant, coach, and trainer, and she helps organizations with planning and executing Agile transformations while respecting their culture, the context of their environment, and their Agile readiness. What is different about Annette and what makes her continuously relevant is that is her combination of strong theoretical knowledge about Agile methods combined with practical experience from Agile transformations. She's a convinced Agilist, but she still applies good project management practice where appropriate. And when she's not busy doing client work, she's blogging, podcasting, giving interviews, or writing books. So welcome, Annette. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for that introduction. I'll see if I can share my screen somehow. Find the right presentation.
Green button on the bottom of your screen. You must have something called share.
Yeah. I'm just trying to find the presentation. I had several windows open, so my apologies.
We're able to see. Yeah.
I hope you can see what's on the screen now. And I'm going to try to put it into presentation mode. And on we go. Kanban in stealth mode. And this presentation is about how I applied Kanban practices in an organization that was really very much into SAFe. Maria has already introduced me, so I'm not going to say too much. Even though my biggest passion is, in fact, Kanban implementations, I do not have the luxury as an Agile expert, coach, and advisor to choose what methods my clients they decide to implement. So, of course, I respect what they have been doing, but it's very difficult not to think Kanban when I see something that's not working as well as it possibly could. As you mentioned, Maria, I'm still very much into the classic world of project management as well, and I'm working together with Project Management Institute, and I don't have to introduce that to you guys. But when they have Agile initiatives, I've been working for the past many years as one of their subject matter experts, and I'm also collaborating with Kanban University. So enough about me, and let me just jump straight into it, and let's look at the agenda. At first, I'm going to start in the helicopter and have a look at the conditions when you are looking at Agile transformations in general. What needs to be in place and why is it sometimes difficult to make Agile transformations work. Then I'll move on to discussing a bit about why SAFe is so compelling for executives, and also why, in my experience, you quite often see that SAFe implementations are not running very smoothly, and sometimes they even fail. And then back to the title of this agenda, I'll be speaking a bit about what happened when I was involved in a SAFe program and the dilemmas that I faced there. And then, as mentioned, you're welcome to ask questions if you have questions concerning the slides as I move along, or you can wait until the very end and ask any questions that you may have at that point in time. So let's look at the Agile transformations from the helicopter perspective. This is the moon, and as I guess all of us know, there's one side of the moon that's always in the light and the other side is always in the dark. So there was one time I was sitting in my summer house looking at the moon, very beautiful, and I thought, well, in fact, the work that I'm doing professionally, it reminds me of the moon. Some of the things I'm working with are always in the light, and that would be, for instance, the method that you have chosen to work with. In this case, you are looking at the 6 Kanban practices. It might as well have been Scrum or SAFe, but you can read a lot about it. You can show the process maybe in even one single A4 sheet of paper, and as I show it here, just one single slide. And there are books written, and people are blogging, and you can go to YouTube, and you can learn a lot of things about it. But what's always in the dark is on the left-hand side of the moon here, and that's stuff like silo mentality and the culture in the organizations, the values that exist in the organization. And sometimes when I hear somebody mentioning, I don't know if that's the same for you guys, when people say, well, oh, and then came politics, then I know I need to be worried, because then that's not a good sign. Also, how do you deal with new demand? How do you prioritize new demand? How change ready is your organization? How mature and disciplined is the organization? Mindset, habits, management style, all of these things, and not to forget cross-team dependencies. Sometimes you'll see organizations are quite well organized, and sometimes it's very, very messy. But it's the stuff that's hidden. You cannot read anything about company culture or how the processes work. Usually you can't find it on any company's intranet, all of these things that are mentioned here. But they are seeping through the organization on an everyday basis, and you're hit by it all the time. When you're working, both when you're working with classic projects, and certainly if you want to make a transformation from a classic way of working to an agile way of working. And it's the stuff that's on the left-hand side that is going to make it possible or not to have success with the agile transformation that you're trying to make in a company. Is something that's very often forgotten, because people tend to believe that if only you change the organization, then everything is going to be well and fine. But it's not going to change anything about the stuff on the left-hand side until you're doing something actively about it. When you're looking at a normal company, basically any company, there will be silos. There will be in this case, you can see there are several areas in company X here. You will find several departments. There'll be key resources in this department or in these departments. And those key resources, they are often the bottleneck that everybody will be asking for help from all over the place. When you really have a lot of silo thinking, it prevents agility. It's not a silo mentality, and silo thinking and agility doesn't go very well together. Furthermore, you will often see that in those silos, there are different priorities. You may have a strategy in the organization, but usually you'll see that the different areas may have different priorities, and the different departments within those areas, they might be thinking differently about the priorities too. And it makes it very, very difficult to get this joint agreement about what is important and what is not. But if you are able to jointly agree what is the prioritization from the helicopter view, so that nobody is doing anything that's not part of the strategy and it's seeping down through the organization, if that's a possibility, then it certainly facilitates agility. What you ought to be concerned about, no matter if you're working in the classic way or in an agile way, it is in fact the customer lead time. And that's what you can see below the dotted line. It's a value chain where a new initiative, a new project is started. There's a client that has asked for something, and to create that something, to develop that something, it needs to go through several teams. And then once it's gone through all the teams that need to be involved, then the client will have this nice packaging his or her hands and everything will be finished. But where you might have a framework like Scrum being totally concerned about how each individual team is doing, what really matters is how is the value chain doing, how is the customer lead time, how efficient are we, and what is determining the customer lead time? It's not so much team efficiency as it's the wait times between stuff is moved from one team to the next, where you will often see something that's completed in the red team here moves on to the yellow team, but it might not be on the top of the prioritization list in the yellow team. And therefore you will see that things are often waiting before it moves on to the next team, waiting again, moving on to the next team, so on and so forth. And even if the red team here is really, really good at doing whatever agile method they're doing or any method they're doing, it doesn't really matter if that efficiency is drowning in waste in the system when you're looking at it on a whole, if you're looking at the value stream from one end to the other. So what I'm trying to persuade people is to be more concerned about customer lead time and wait times and waste in the system, rather than being completely absorbed in making each individual team be brilliant at whatever they're doing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be concerned about team performance, because of course you should, but on the other hand, be just as concerned about what goes on in the system on the whole. Furthermore, what you measure is what you get. And when I'm dreaming, I'm sometimes trying to dream about what would be the ideal situation seen from my point of view. My ideal situation would be that you measure people on their ability to help with cross-team stuff, with cross-team dependencies, with wait times, as I talked about before, with reducing bottlenecks, all of these things that are going to smoothen the system. So the day where you'll see managers being measured on how well they are at working with other managers to help the value chain become more and more smooth, the happier I would be. I've also often wondered why SAFe is so compelling for executives and why those SAFe implementations, they fail. In the work that I'm doing every day, as Maria mentioned, I'm working actively on client projects, and I do get a lot of information about what goes out or what goes on in the real world, out in reality. And I have very often seen that it's difficult to make SAFe work. But still, you see many SAFe implementations, particularly if it's big companies. So I was contemplating at what time, why is it so compelling? And what I found is, first of all, I think SAFe is a brilliant name for a framework, because when you're doing projects or programs or big initiatives, who wouldn't want to be safe? And when you're looking at the framework, it looks as if it's got everything covered. Certainly it scales, because that's the purpose of a scaled agile framework for lean enterprises. And having mentioned that, as a matter of fact, it is kind of a prerequisite that the enterprise that introduces SAFe is already lean, but this is very often not the case. But getting back to why people choose SAFe as their way of working, it does scale, and it looks as if any role that you can find, even if you have to reorganize, it looks as if you can find a place for any role that you may have in the organization. And also you can recognize many of the roles from Scrum, even if they're not completely similar. So it looks very good, and as I mentioned here, all the popular ideas, methods, techniques, etc., Scrum, Kanban, extreme programming, design thinking, DevOps, all of these things are incorporated in the same framework, and that might seem to be a compelling idea, that all of these things are all combined. But if anybody were to ask me, frameworks, methods such as Kanban, such as Scrum, such as DevOps, they are in fact methods and frameworks in their own right. So it does actually complicate things when you try to combine so many different things. But anyway, many people choose that way to scale whatever they're doing in the organization. And if I were to mention a few more reasons, I would also like to mention the lemming effect. When you look around, you can see that other big companies are using SAFe. So you might be tempted as a top manager in a company to say, well, since everybody else are doing it, I'd better do it too. If it works for them, we'll be fine too. And then you count on the other guys having analyzed what options are out there, and you may think that since they chose SAFe, I might as well cut a few corners and choose it already. So I'm always scared when people choose anything for the wrong reasons. So what I'm usually advising my clients is to try to have a look at what are the purposes of wanting to go agile in the first place, and who are we? How mature are we? How change ready are we? How structured are we before deciding which method to use? Then when you look at why SAFe implementations fail, and in fact, if you're looking at the state of Agile, it's a report that comes out every year. You will see some of the same things there. And the first thing I would like to mention is lack of leadership. If you want to do something that's so big, make a solution that's so grand, you really need leadership to stand behind and both push at the teams that are involved in this transformation, and also be at the very front to say, this is the way we are going and we really want it. I also see, as just as the state of Agile, that lack of understanding, that you are choosing a framework or a method and you don't really understand in depth how the method really works. You have scratched the surface, but you haven't seen the way that everything is interconnected, and you don't see, you don't really realize the complexity of doing it. So it may look easy on the surface, but when you start to dig deeper, you will find that it's very complex. And there isn't really a good understanding of the complexity in those frameworks and those methods. And also, since SAFe, just as Scrum is a framework, there are many opinions about how you should do, because there's not so much how to, you need to do exactly this. So that means that what you expect from your employees, it's not very clear. It's often not very clear, so people don't know, what am I supposed to do on Monday that I didn't do last Friday? You also see people abandon SAFe because they find that there's too much overhead, too many meetings, too many people involved in meetings, too many roles that are not producing any kind of value. And also, in many cases, the positive results fail to emerge. So that means that the expectations that you had when you started off with this implementation in the first place, you might have an idea that everything is going to go quicker through the system and you'll be more productive and quality will raise. And if you don't see those results, you might be asking yourself, so why are we doing this? Why are we having this very complex work in place in our organizations when we don't really see any results of implementing it? So these are some of the reasons that I've heard, both with the clients I've been working with and also when I talk to other agile coaches, the reasons for SAFe sometimes failing. And this is not a SAFe bashing thing from my part. It's just a suggestion to be really realistic about what you have in your hands when you want to do something that's very complex. It's stuff, I mean, I'm sure that you can all agree that when we are delivering projects or programs, they are in nature complex work. And sometimes I've been wondering, so why do organizations stick to a system that really doesn't give the expected results, and then it's very difficult to get to work? And again, this is guesswork, educated guesswork maybe from my part, but sometimes I do believe that once you've made this decision and once you have invested a lot of money in a safe implementation, it takes a lot of training of your organization. It does cause a lot of disruption because you're changing a lot of things at the same time, and you will see these disrupting initiatives. You will see the productivity is falling until it hopefully starts to rise again. You will believe that since we made this decision and since we've spent so much money, it makes us look silly if we abandon it, even if we can see that we are not getting the results that we really wanted. And in many cases, and that goes for both Scrum implementations and safe implementations, people do not measure the results. They might not even have calculated a return on investment, so you don't discuss whether the return on investment is positive or negative, because actually you don't know because you haven't measured it. And that's really a pity. And sometimes, I'm not here to provoke anybody, but sometimes I'm asking myself, what would have happened if we have spent just a fraction of the amount that we are spending on agile transformations to make whatever method that we're using to make that work better than it's doing now? But again, that's an open question, and I haven't got any answer to that. This man here is Taiichi Ono, and he was part of the developers of the Toyota production system, which is actually the foundation for what I'm going to be speaking about in a minute, Kanban for knowledge work. And this is a quote that he once made, that you have to think for yourself and face your difficulties instead of trying to borrow wisdom. And that's a different way of saying, beware of the lemming effect. Don't do what everybody else is doing, because your company is different, your culture is different, your employees are different. So you need to think for yourself before you jump into agile waters. So as I mentioned before, I'm really passionate about Kanban, and the reason for being that, that's simply because I've been working for the past 14 years with agile systems, and not once have I seen that Kanban couldn't work. Sometimes you'll see that it's working in not the most fantastic kind of way, but you can make it work even in less mature teams, to put it that way. That's the reason, that's one of the reasons why I'm such a convinced Kanban consultant. But as mentioned before, being an independent consultant, I cannot choose that I will only work with Kanban, and I do love the agile way of working. So I'm happily taking on assignments, for instance, in safe implementations, and this is the case here. I was called in to be a consultant in a big company, and I was working with an agile release train, delivering a very important and immensely expensive program. And the situation when I was first brought in was they didn't really have transparency of what was happening. They didn't really know where they were. And there was a very heavy non-agile governance. And that's also an anti-pattern that I see in many places, that people or managers would like their teams to become more agile, but they stick to the old ways of governance, or stick to the old way of management. and it doesn't really work very well that way. But this was the situation here as well. Whenever people want to go agile, the first thing that I hear from the managers is that they want predictability. They want to have teams that deliver on their promises. And I guess that I've never heard managers not saying this. But in this organization, there was a lot of unpredictability. There was resource overload, and there were many reasons for that. And it's not only something from outside the team, but there was indeed management push, meaning that even if you had started a sprint and it was locked, or started a program increment, if you were looking at PI planning, you would still experience management push, that they were trying to start new items that hadn't been included in the PI or in the sprint, and therefore it kind of disrupted any planning that had already been done, and it did overload the resources. There was also a lot of over-optimism in the team, overconfidence about how much they could achieve in each sprint, so that meant that they committed themselves too hard. And again, when you don't try to, if you don't get to strike that balance between supply and demand, you will be overloaded and there will be unpredictability. There was a lot of task switching, and again, that's just a bad habit. And there was also too little analysis of the work that was in the product backlog or the program backlog of both the teams as well as the product managers. There was no handling of cross-team dependencies, and as I mentioned before when we were looking at the slide with all the silos, it's the cross-team dependencies that are really one of the biggest flow stoppers. There were no handling of those, and there might be teams that were talking about cross-team dependencies, but each team were talking about them in a different way. So this was the situation when I was pulled in. And then I started to work with the release train engineer, and we tried to figure out, so what could we do? Again, I was not brought in to be a Kanban coach or Kanban consultant, but of course, in my toolbox, as mentioned before, it's quite broad, and I'm not married to any particular method, but I can never put my Kanban knowledge aside, because I know that even introducing a few of those practices that are within the Kanban method can make significant change. And Kanban can be combined with any method, and that's the reason why I always bring the Kanban method with me no matter where I'm working. I could not speak openly about Kanban either, because I was there to be an agile coach, and my assignment was not to change anything in a more Kanban-like direction. And this is, of course, a dilemma. So what I did, I tried to put myself in my customer's shoes, tried to find out, so what were their ambitions, what did they really want to achieve? And of course, I did respect the choices that they had made. And this is where I started applying Kanban practices in stealth mode. And what I wanted to do was to create continuous improvement, going back to the reason why I was there, to see, okay, so if we have these things that doesn't really work well, what can we fix and what should we fix first? And then you might ask yourself, so why would I want to keep Kanban in secret in the first place? And one of the things that I have learned is that in many, many cases, I'm going to hear some of the myths about Kanban that really exist out there in the open. There's still very many people that believe that Kanban is a primitive task board, something where you just have your tasks and they might be walking back and forth almost at random. This is absolutely wrong. There are also many people that still think that Kanban is only for small operations teams, something that is primitive, as mentioned. There are still many people that don't know that Kanban scales. You can decide to use Kanban in the full organization, which is really efficient. And there are very many people that don't see Kanban as anything that has to do with agility. And there's a lot of religion out there. And I did not want to start any kind of religious fight about my method is better than your method, because that's futile and it doesn't bring you anywhere when it comes to the point. And this is the reason why I decided to not even mention Kanban with one single word. What I did have in mind, however, is this book here. In the autumn of 2021, David Anderson and Theodora Bosheva, they sent this book to the market, the Kanban maturity model. It had been underway for some years, and there was a different version of it that was quite different from this. But this Kanban maturity model is really one of the most important things that I believe has happened in the agile space for many, many years. And the reason for liking that model so much is both the way that it has come to life. David and Theodora has been looking at data from all over the globe. And instead of sitting at that desk and writing this book, instead they try to look at empiric evidence about what is happening out there. What are the practices that are in use, and what are the results that people gain from using these practices? And in this, looking at this data, they realized that you could actually group that people were working into 6 levels of maturity, starting with maturity level 0, which they call oblivious, meaning that in those teams that are oblivious, you'll be working with people that are not very systematic in the way they're working with things. They are very individualistic. They are thinking more me, me, me. Am I working with something that I find is interesting? And am I allowed to do it in any which way that I would like and I would prefer? It's people that are not very methodical in the way that they're working. And sometimes when I'm being pop smart, I'm calling those guys for cowboys. So unstructured and all the rest of it, that would be maturity level 0. Then when you move on to maturity level 1, this is where you will see that there's more team focus. Instead of working as a group of people that just incidentally have the same boss, those guys are starting at the maturity level 1 to work more together as a team and be more concerned about how the team is doing, instead of just thinking about how am I doing and what do I want, but instead looking at team productivity. And then you move up being fit for purpose and so on, until you end to be built for survival. And to be honest, not very many companies are at that maturity level. And maybe this will come as a surprise to you, but David and Theodora and the people that helped them look at this data, they found that around 80% of the companies that they had been looking at, they would be in maturity level 0 or 1. And I thought that was very thought-provoking, because I would imagine that you would find more maturity out there. But then I came to realize that when I look back at the work that I've been doing in the agile space, this is exactly what I've been finding in the teams that I've been working with, or in the organizations that I've been working with. Even if they are big, successful organizations, this is still the situation when you are looking at the way that teams are working with whatever they are doing. And I know, of course, that the Kanban maturity model was written for Kanban implementations, but I still find it extremely valuable and useful when I'm looking at the teams that I'm working with, to try and figure out, so how far can I get with these teams? You cannot introduce a maturity level 0 or 1 team to something very big and a lot of changes at the same time. It's never going to work, because people simply can't cope with it. And what I'm also doing is to try to figure out not only how the teams are working, but also how the system is working. And this is what I mentioned before. One of the problems they had was that they were hit by cross-team dependencies, and teams would in mid-sprint find, oops, where did that come from? And that has to do with how the system is working. And this is one of the things that I was thinking about when I was looking around in this organization. When you're looking at Kanban, and I know that this is not a Kanban course or anything, but what I decided to look at was, what can I use in this safe organization that would make sense? And from the 3 management principles in Kanban, certainly the start with what you do now, this is what I took with me when I started to look at what was feasible and what was not feasible in this organization. So trying to understand the current processes and trying to look at the roles and responsibilities and job titles to figure out, are they clear? Do people understand what is lying in the role that they have, and all those kinds of things. This is what I took with me when I started working with the different teams here. And of course, I couldn't introduce them to the Kanban management principle or change management principles in Kanban, but it was just a note to myself, this is what I need to do. I need to start with what people are doing now, and then look at what can we improve to get to this continuous improvement state that everybody is looking for. And I don't know if you know the Kanban practices, so I'll just go through them very rapidly. But I introduced some of these Kanban practices without, again, I know I'm repeating myself here, I didn't even mention Kanban. But to visualize what was going on, that's a must. If you want to have transparency, and this is one of the problems that they had, there wasn't really transparency about what was happening in this agile release train. So I was trying to look, I would start to look at how people visualized whatever they were doing to make sure that there was the necessary transparency. And when you're talking about visualizing Kanban, this would be both who's doing what. It would also be what is blocked, how long has it been blocked, and why has it been blocked, and what have you been doing about it. It would be cross-team dependencies. It would be a different class of service. It would be different work item types, stuff like that. That's part of the visualization part in Kanban. But I decided to go for at least visualizing invisible work to find out, is people still getting tapped on the shoulder, asked to do things that are not really within the sprint. And we knew that, or I realized that very soon, because again, there was push with new stuff coming in. So we wanted to visualize that to make sure that we could see what does it cost when you are disrupting sprints or program increments in that way. The next practice in Kanban, that's limit work in progress. And if anybody would ask me, I honestly believe that this is the most important practice of them all. Simply because the less things you have going on in a board, be it a Kanban board or a Scrum board, the quicker everything goes. And here you can also see the Kanban mantra, which is stop starting, start finishing. And as a project manager, that I've been really upset sometimes when I heard people reporting progress to be 85% or 82% or 92% or something. And I've been wondering, so why is it 92 and not 95 or 85 or something else? And how come it is so difficult to get it from 98 to 100 so it's completely finished? And this is one of the reasons why I really love this part, stop starting, start finishing, because in Kanban and in agile systems as such, things are very black and white. Either you are done or you are not done. I like that very much. But limit work in progress, that prevents people from task switching. And this was also one of the problems that they had, because there was nothing in the Scrum framework that prevents people from starting each and every activity in a sprint at the same time. And that's something that doesn't prevent people from task switching. So you can start doing something, then you can jump to the next and do something here, and then jump back and then to a third, and back and forth without ever completing something. But when you limit work in progress, you need to finish something before you can start something else. And then manage flow. Kanban is data driven, meaning that we're looking at lead times. How long does it take from we have an activity in the queue and until it's finished, so that we can manage, we can see, do we see some trends that are strange? Do we have some lead time distributions that are inexplicably long? And how can we reduce those lead times so that we can be quicker and have things flow quicker through our system, so we can be more productive without being more busy, or without sacrificing quality or anything like it, but simply because we have a system around how we are working. But in managed flow, this is where we are looking at data to see how are we actually doing. It's not a crystal ball, it's not gut feeling, it's actual data from previous times where we are looking at what were we actually able to do instead of what were we hoping to be able to do. The fourth practice, make rules explicit. The reason why this is important is that individuals are thinking differently about the same thing. So when you're discussing in your team, what does it mean that things have the right quality? Or what does it mean that we are actually done? Or when can we move something from one column to the next? Or what color of magnets are we using if we are blocked? Or how do we visualize different classes of service, so on and so forth? These are the rules that we're talking about here. And the fifth practice is to implement feedback loops. That means that you are meeting with people, whoever can help you improve the flow in your Kanban system. You are speaking to, the team is meeting, of course, in Kanban meetings. Sometimes it's necessary to meet every day, but sometimes it's enough to meet once a week. And this is where Kanban does not prescribe any particular frequency, but we are asking people to think for themselves, when is it often enough, so that we don't waste each other's time on meetings that does not produce any value. And last but not least, we are improving collaboratively and evolving experimentally. And this is also what I decided to put into play here, because we wanted continuous improvement, because we wanted to improve the system that wasn't really working perfectly. And talking about experiments, is just trying things out on the small scale at first. And then if it works, then you spread it out and use it on the larger scale. If it doesn't work, you throw it away, and then you have wasted a bit of time, but at least you are more wise than you were when you started the experiment. So this is how Kanban works, and these are the how-to in Kanban, if you will. So whether you are working in a very immature team according to the Kanban maturity model, or in a very mature team, these are the 6 practices that you need to put into play. But what did we actually do when we wanted to make these improvements? Continuous improvement is a big thing in all kinds of agile systems, and it was here too. And what we decided to do is to try to visualize, back to the visual part of Kanban, to say, okay, instead of having teams individually working with their improvements, why not visualize what happens both on the program level as well as on the team level? And this is what you can see here. We were in program increment number 6. That means those 3 months long sprints, if you will, that you're using in SAFe. I started my work here in PI4, and this is where we started identifying the improvements that we wanted. And that's what you can see. The green ones, they are completed. The yellow ones are in progress. And the white ones, or the light blue ones, they're the ones that we have that we would like to work with. So at this point in time, the stuff that is in the green squares here, these are what we were working actively with at this point in time. More focus on the program backlog to reduce ambiguity, because we wanted fewer surprises. We wanted to optimize flow and make sure that we were working on the right things, stuff like that. So this is just as an example. So it's of course up to each team or each organization individually to find out, so what is it that we need to fix to be able to improve our system. And then as you can see, one of the classics when you're looking in any agile system that are working in sprints is that you are overconfident, as I mentioned before. So if you're looking at number 5 on the program level, you will see that we agreed with the teams that they shouldn't load themselves more than 70% when they were doing the PI planning, moving into PI 6, because we wanted to reduce this overconfidence and and this being too optimistic, so that predictability could be so that precision could be better, and teams could be more predictable and still work at a sustainable pace. That was very important, again, because the managers in this organization, they were really frustrated because the teams, they didn't deliver to their promises. And this is what we were trying to fix by saying, don't overload whatever you're doing, stop at 70%. And then if miracles happen and everything is completed before time, then there's also a nice backlog and people can just draw the top item from the backlog in case they had completed everything. But looking back at where Kanban came into play, these are in the pinkish colored cycles here. The loading that I just mentioned to get more predictability. And again, balance is a big thing in Kanban. We need to have balance between supply and demand. And the other thing was we decided that we need to reduce work in progress and to start analyze blockers. That was clearly a Kanban thing as well. And what we wanted to achieve by doing that was faster delivery of product of business value and ensuring more focus on reducing waste in the system, reduce wait times, because that was also a big flow killer. Then I introduced them to class of service again, without mentioning Kanban in any way, but to visualize that there was something, class of service that visualizes that something is more important than something else, which is more important than something else. And I'll get back to it in a short while. Again, we wanted faster delivery of high priority activities, and we wanted to visualize what is more important than other things. And this is how you could see that things were moving forward. The managers were very happy about that, because they could see that continuous improvement was not just 2 words that we were using just, on occasion, but we really took it seriously and we were working actively with it. And they could also have a say if they believed that we needed to include something else. So again, that was a way to work with our stakeholders and create more trust in the way that the teams were working. What was come into play here from the practices is visualize, limit work in progress, and improve collaboratively. And again, why, I mentioned it before, but why would you want to limit work in progress and drop task switching? I like to use some analogies from everyday situations. And if you were in a supermarket and you had the choice between these two queues, I guess it's a stupid question if I was to ask you which queue would you choose. Of course, you would choose the one where there was only 2 people in, because everything moves faster when the queue is short. And that's exactly what you want to do. You want to have a short queue in Kanban by limiting what's in the Kanban system. And you want to do that because you don't want task switching. So if we are looking at this cashier here, and he all of a sudden gets the idea, well, time to change places. And this is exactly what you do when you are task switching. You were almost working on priority 1 and having priority 2 as the next in line. But all of a sudden you decide to work with priority 5 or task number 5 or task number 4. You ask everybody to change places. And not only does it create waste because it takes time to move things around, and in the queue that it does take time when people have to find a new place in the queue. But when you're looking at task switching and you're thinking about knowledge work, it is a fact that the brain, it takes time when you are very focused and deeply absorbed in one thing and you switch over to another context. It's something like 20 minutes that you lose every time you switch context from one activity that you're working on to the next. And what if this cashier all of a sudden saw his boss and he said, let my boss get in front. That's what happens when people are tapping you on the shoulder and saying, please, can you give me a quarter of an hour because I need help to do this. Whenever this happens, you are actually putting stuff in the fast lane. You are making all the plans that you have made. You are saying, never mind the plans. I allow this task to come in front of everything else I've planned. And that's just a bad idea. I often talk to people that say, well, I want to help my colleagues, and I think it's a bad idea to say no to everybody. And that's not what I'm implying here. I'm just saying, well, do you need to fix it right now? Do you need to let this activity come in front? Or can you ask people, can it wait until next sprint so we can plan it in together with whatever else we're doing? And this has to do with habits, and these habits are really hard to break. But if you manage to drop task switching and to limit work in progress, it has been calculated that there is some 10-15% optimization to gain only by doing that, by changing those few habits. And of course, we have limit work in progress, one of the Kanban how-to, the practices that I mentioned before. That's what's in play here. Then they were struggling with dependency management. And what we did, we sat down, the release train engineer and I, and said, okay, so what can we do now? And what we decided as a rule of thumb is we don't want to have dependencies visualized that do not introduce risk to the PI goals or the sprint goals. We don't want to have our boards flooded with all sorts of things that are really not putting our goals to danger. So that again, that was having an explicit rule about that. And then we decided that if it was a minor dependency and you can negotiate it with another team, then just handle it on the team level. And as little time as possible should be spent on handling minor dependencies that do no harm, because that's actually taking time away from important stuff. So these 3 rules were spread across the release train, and there were, if I don't remember wrong, around 12 teams in this release train. And what we decided to do was to make this process where we said at first, you identify cross-team dependencies during PI planning. And that's part of PI planning, so that goes without saying. And then you visualize those cross-team dependencies in the team backlog. But then, and this is what they didn't do before, during sprints, identify and visualize new dependencies, because that was something that actually happened at random before, where people would say, oops, I have a dependency, and what can we do about that? Or oops, where did that come from? And we wanted to reduce those oopses as much as possible, so that we could negotiate prioritization of dependencies in case of conflict. And sometimes the people that you are depending on, they are those specialists that I mentioned before, that everybody else wants. So if you can negotiate the prioritization, if there's a conflict of interest, then you are in a good place. And then unresolved dependencies are input to PI planning. So this is the process that we introduced to the team, and we decided how to visualize cross-team dependencies on their different boards, so that they had the same language around dependencies. They have the same way, a structured way of dealing with cross-team dependencies, and they had standardized the process and standardized the way that they were working with it. So this is, again, it's not rocket science, but when you're looking at the system, trying to see what's harmful, when you're looking at flow and what is creating blockers and what's preventing us from reaching the goal, trying to identify those system-like things, this is where you get a picture of where does it pay to start improving. And again, we were visualizing and we were making rules and policies explicit. The second, the fourth practice of the 6 Kanban practices. I mentioned class of service before. And this is, if you don't know it already, and I'm not going to go into any deep details, but I'm sure that you can look at the material afterwards and read all the details. But the fact is that there are some things that are more important than other things. And that's something that's quite logical. But in Kanban, we have 4 classes of service, and we have 4 cost of delay functions that go together with those classes of service. So very quickly, the expedite stuff, it's something all hands on deck kind of activities where it will be very costly if you don't fix it immediately. And when you have a fixed date in Kanban, this is where something is going to fall apart if you don't reach that date. So it has a cost of delay function that has maybe not much impact in the start, but once you reach this particular fixed date, then cost is going to skyrocket maybe. And standard class of service, these are the ordinary tasks that this is why you were hired in the company in the first place. And the function looks like a S-like curve. Not very expensive now, but the cost may grow over time. And then the intangible class of service, this is where you don't have maybe an external client, but you know, because you are the specialists, that if we standardize this, for instance, what I told you about with the cross-team dependencies, if we standardize this, we are going to be more efficient. You won't have a client say, please, can you standardize the way that you're dealing with cross-team dependencies? They don't care much about that. They just want their little parcel, that finished activities, their whatever they ordered. But you know as a team that we can really improve the way we are working if we do this in our team. And this is the intangible class of service. But since I was not there to talk about Kanban practices, what we decided to go for is high, medium, and low. And this is a good way to start. And what we wanted to do was to create clearer pull signals, meaning that if you see a red class of service, you need to work with that before you take a yellow one or a green one. And I also proposed to them that they visualize blockers and analyze them. And this is all very simple and intuitive, and it didn't cause any friction in the team because it makes sense. And sometimes I'm tempted to say that Kanban is common sense condensed. So this is where I started, and this is a good place to start if using class of service is new to a team. And you can always decide whether you want to change it later on. Again, visualize and making rules and policies explicit. It was much more easy. You can immediately see if there's something red that you need to take at first before you take something that's yellow and so on. And then if I, just to mention a few general observations, I found not only here, but basically everywhere, that it's a very hard habit to break the habit of pushing activities into sprints, into PIs, into teams that are already too busy doing something. It was happening all the time. Sometimes it was the steering committee that got new ideas. It was the program managers or the product owners that got new ideas. And when you then combine it with overconfidence, then it's impossible to be predictable. We actively try to stop those managers and customers from pushing new tasks. and we didn't quite succeed because that habit, that's really a hard one to break. And just the other day, I heard a manager say, well, I really like my teams to be agile, but don't forget, I'm the manager here. So if I have something and I can see that this is really important, I should be allowed to introduce new tasks to them. And again, that's lack of understanding about what agile systems are all about. So this habit of push, if you can get to a situation where you are pulling stuff instead of pushing, you're also in a better place. Looking at the Kanban practices, we are improving collaboratively. And we are evolving experimentally. We tried all sorts of things to prevent people from pushing. And as I mentioned, we didn't quite succeed. And then again, a general observation, it's more the rule than the exceptions that teams are either overloaded by managers pushing new stuff into them or teams overloading themselves. And if I'm doing talks like this one, for instance, I often have a glass of water. In this case, it's a bottle of soda water. And if I'm lifting this and I'm saying to people, well, or somebody is saying to me, can you fill in a liter of water in this bottle? Anybody can see that that's not possible. It can't be done because it only contains half a liter. But somehow, when you are talking about knowledge work, people tend to think that you can always push yet another task. You can always start yet another project, even if you know that the capacity is already completely absorbed. But with knowledge work, it's exactly the same as with physical things like a glass. You have a certain capacity, and if you try to overload that capacity, this is where you see poor performance, poor team performance, projects that fail, employees that are sick with stress, and high staff turnover, and sometimes or very often disappointed customers because their projects are delayed. And as mentioned before, we were trying to persuade teams to not load more than 70% into the program increments, but we didn't quite succeed. And that's because teams often find that if I promise to do all of this, I'll be this fantastic guy. But I try to persuade teams that you are a fantastic team if you promise something and you deliver it. But this is a very old habit that we just pull in too much. And since we're working in complexity, there are many unknown unknowns, which means that even if we have planned, even if we have tried to analyze whatever we're trying to do, we will experience those unknown unknowns. And when we start working with things, something completely unexpected will turn up that will absorb our time. So we need to put in slack into our systems. Again, we didn't quite succeed, but it was getting better. In this case, it had to do with limit work in progress. So if I am to conclude on this, is that no matter what agile environment you're working in, it is complex. Kanban is maybe the simplest way to agility, and Kanban can be combined with whatever else you are doing. ITIL, you might be working with PMI's project management method, or Prince2, or whatever you're working with, Scrum, whatever. You can combine it. And no matter where you're working, you can take Kanban practices and systems thinking and get significant improvement. And what I mentioned before, if you were to do only two things, the advice is to limit work in progress and to start using service classes, or class of service, sorry. And it has been measured that productivity by just doing those two things will increase by between 10 and 15%. And I guess that that's a low-hanging fruit. So you can get those improvements, and in my case, it was in stealth mode. But even so, we did get some improvements. It was better when I left than when I started. So I was thinking just like Rosie here, yes, we can, Ben. And with that, this is the end of my presentation. And if you would like to link with me, connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, you are very welcome to it. This is my contact information in case you have any questions about what I've been talking about here, agility in general. So feel free to contact me. And then now I guess it's time for questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Annette. That was very informative. I liked what you said about Kanban being common sense condensed. That's a very pointy summary. Let me pull up the questions that we received. So the first is, if you can explain in brief the benefits of implementing Kanban and how this should be implemented when there is development and support team.
Yeah, I can explain that and quite briefly too. The big difference between Kanban and, for instance, Scrum and Safe is that it's a flow system and not a collaboration system, meaning that it doesn't work in sprints. That means you do not need to try to hit the bullseye that you are trying to hit when you're working in Safe or in Scrum, where you're trying to predict the future. In Kanban, we know that the future is it's uncertain. So the system is built for uncertainty. And this is why we are working with very little going on at the same time. And then we have a board, an upstream board for all the options. And you can change your mind very often if you need to do that. Kanban also work with a concept called work item types. So that means that you can combine different kinds of work, like new development, like bug fixing, like maintenance, like ad hoc stuff coming to a team. You can combine that in one single Kanban board, and you can decide again. You still build on the 6 practices, and then it's context specific how the board looks. It can be very different from team to team. So Kanban is not a one size fits all, but there's one size that fits a certain context. So you build a board that reflects whatever you're doing. So if you have different types of work item types, as I mentioned before, then you can combine it in one single board and decide what are the rules about, again, class of service. Do we want to allocate resources in a certain way between new development, between bug fixing, between support items, and whatever else you want to do? Do we restrict using work in progress limits? Do we restrict it only on the columns, or do we restrict it also for the work item types? So there are many different handles to push when you're working in a Kanban system. But the main thing is that it does not work in sprints. We do not want to predict a future that's unpredictable in the first place, but we want to be very precise about the way we are working. And this is what I mentioned before, it's systems thinking. And when David Anderson defines it, it's pragmatic, actionable, evidence-based guidance. I hope that this is answering the question that you had for me here.
Thank you. Whoever asked the question, if you have some more comments or questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and speak up. In the meantime, I'll go over to the next question. Are there any measures in Kanban saving and following KPIs and OKRs?
Well, you can have those both KPIs and OKRs, but and to reach those, lead time is the main measurement that you're using, because lead time, that's reality, like I mentioned before. This is the productivity that you have proven historically that you have. And lead time is a distribution, so it might be that a certain type of activities might take between 2 and 48 days. Now I'm just pulling numbers out of my sleeve, but it's a distribution. And then the narrower the distribution, the more precise you can be when you have your KPIs and want to reach OKRs or KPIs, because you have a lot of knowledge about past performance, and then you can better predict the future in terms of OKRs or KPIs.
Next question: Do you see many overlaps between Kanban and Six Sigma methodologies?
There is some overlap, and in fact, Kanban was when David Anderson started in the beginning of the 2000s. He called it Lean Kanban, because indeed both Kanban and other agile methods and frameworks as well, they do have lean elements, and Kanban does indeed have some lean elements as a part of its foundation. But it's not so concerned about reducing waste as Kanban is on improving flow. So even if there is some waste, we don't really care much about that if flow is really optimal. So I guess it was maybe 2-3 years ago, David Anderson and his team decided to drop the lean. So now it's now it's only called the Kanban method, but there are indeed similarities about standardizing stuff that are regularly. If you're working on something regularly, then you try to standardize it, just as I mentioned, the way that we dealt with the cross-team dependencies, and also removing waste in the system in terms of wait times and all the stuff that I mentioned. So there are indeed similarities.
The next one is, I experienced in my firm that Kanban is not used because it fails to provide enough KPIs to track team's progress during the PI. What kind of tips could you provide for that and avoid tunnel effect until the end of the PI? Well,
I would measure, as I mentioned before, because usually I don't see people start measuring lead time when I'm coming in as a coach or an advisor, and I'm hopping up and down and say, you need to measure lead time because lead time is reality. I don't want anybody's best guesses. I don't want any crystal balls. I want facts. And this is the data-driven part of Kanban. So my guess would be that the teams that were failing to deliver on their OKRs or KPIs, they were not using the Kanban method as I just described it. They may use some of the practices, having a task board or whatever, but my guess would be that they have not been measuring their progress, and they have not been trying to reduce their lead time, which is the optimization of flow. They are interconnected, and this is what it's all about when you work with Kanban.
Thank you. What is the first step you advise us to try to convince our colleague or boss at Coffee Machine to start using Kanban?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and thank you very much for that, because as mentioned, there are many people. I was talking to a bunch of managers. I have a masterclass for agile managers that I was doing the other day, and they say, yeah, we know about Kanban. And then I started to explain some of the things that I've been talking about here, and then they realized, well, we thought we knew what Kanban was, but now we realize that we only know part of the story, and there's much more to it than that. What I'm doing when I'm brought in to do something with Scrum, and you can see, if you cannot plan in batches, you cannot use Scrum, and you cannot use SAFe. And that's just a fact, end of story. So when I see these trends, I'm trying to go the other way around and say, how would you like me to prove that this team can be predictable? Oh, he or she would love that. Would it be okay if I use Kanban? Yeah, whatever works. If you try to promise them certain results, and of course you need to be convinced that you can actually deliver, because otherwise you look silly, right? But I am I'm so experienced with Kanban, so I'm ready to promise these things. And if you are trying to press Scrum, or either you work with Scrum or Kanban on the team level, right? So if you're trying to press a team to use Scrum, but their everyday life is completely unpredictable, how are you going to get predictability in the sprint goals? It's impossible. How can you plan? Well, I'm going to have one incident week 1, and then 2 incidents in week 2, and then another incident in week 3. It doesn't work like this. So if this is your daily life, go Kanban. And this means that you'll see something not working very well. And if you can promise a solution to that, whatever is not working very well, people are often very open to letting you try. And what I've seen in many cases by now is that when you start working with Kanban in teams where with unpredictability, maintenance work or operations work, stuff like that, their shoulders come down, their stress level goes down, because all of a sudden they can see they're part of the Agile family. They're just doing it in a slightly different way. And at the time they realize, oh, we don't have to plan in sprints, they are so relieved. And everybody's happy because productivity go up, teams are more happy, more productive. So what's not to like? So promise more productivity, more predictability, and happier team members, and then just go Kanban.
That's a great advice. Thank you, Annette. I don't see any more questions. If anyone has any more questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask. Xavier is going to put the PDU code in the chat for those that need to leave. I noticed that some people messaged that they need to leave now. Thank you, Annette, for this wonderful presentation. It's very enlightening, a lot of actionable advice.
Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure.
Nice
meeting you guys.
I wait just a few more seconds. If anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourselves. If not, I can maybe share the final slides. Okay, so we are in the middle of the Agile Week and we still have many sessions planned until Friday. I would especially like to draw your attention to the closing event on Friday, which is a discussion with our Agile Week speakers, and we will answer also questions that which were not possible to be answered during the week. So please register. In case you are interested to join some of the sessions and you forget to register yourself, you can still use the same link to access them. Usually it should work. Our next event is planned for 15th of June, and it's an event on green finance. We organize it with Communauté Francophone, and it will be in French. We will send out an invitation per email, and we will advertise the event also on our social media, so stay tuned. Then we are also planning the next campfire event either in June or July, and it will not be a virtual event. We are planning different formats, walk and talk, where the group will meet somewhere in Luxembourg and go for a walk and do their usual discussions. Then we are also planning Lean Startup and project management. The date is not known yet, and a big 10th anniversary party for the 10th anniversary of the PMI Luxembourg chapter, and we are looking forward to meeting you all there. To stay in touch with us, you can use our social media. We are on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. You can also look up all the information on our website, www.pmi.lu. And here is the PDU code. Thank you very much, Annette, again, for this great presentation and for sharing your experience and for the advice you gave us. Thank you very much to the events team for organizing this Agile Week. It's been a huge amount of work. To mention a few names, thank you to Lynn, Dana, and to Divya. There are many other people who collaborated on this, but there is no time to mention all of them. And I wish you all a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Nice being here. Bye-bye.